My bucolic life, we every city strife. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and some spin, and move the horses into the barn. Then time to move them out again. Red parchment pastures, beautiful white houses. The view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.
Welcome back. We're going to be doing the sleeves today for the Chanel jacket, and this is what we have so far. And the sleeve pattern is a 3-piece sleeve. There's a front, a back, and a little bitty middle piece, so I'll show those to you in a minute. And just to let you know, I am going to be going about this slightly different than both the instructions on the pattern and the Claire Schaefer book, but we'll get the same finished product. I believe that what they're asking for, just going to go about it slightly different method. So let me turn the camera down and we'll get started. So these are my 3 sleeve pieces here. This is the, what are they calling this one? They're calling this one the back, the center, and the front. So this is my process. I am at this point cutting out my main fabric, which is this pink tweed again, and I'm cutting out the exact size of the pattern piece. I'm going to do that for all of these. Now, the instructions are going to call for thread basting and thread marking, all of the quilting lines and everything like that. I'm not actually going to be doing very much thread marking here. This one actually has no markings on it at all. That's a grain line, except for this one little dot here, okay? I am marking mostly on the wrong side of my fabric with my heat erasable pen, just because I have tested it. I know it's going to disappear just fine. And the way that I'm cutting them is 1 piece at a time. I'm not doing it doubled because I really want to be careful and make sure my grain line is right. So on this one, this is my grain line and these are quilting lines, okay? So 1 at a time, I'm placing my pattern on. I'm going to cut the outside, and then after I have the outside cut, I'm going to come back and mark it. So the same method that I use on one, I will use on them all. So I'm just going to show you the one right now. Now, this fabric is very tough. I don't know that I would use it again. Just throwing that out there right now. I think that it'll be nice for winter and everything, but in general, I think that a thicker fabric is more difficult, and that is just because it's harder on a thicker fabric, you know, and it's lovely. It is very lovely, but to get all of that easing to work exactly right, and this is not a natural fiber, it's a blend, and because it's a blend, I can't use a really strong heat with my iron without risking it, you know, melting or something. So that's a problem too. So throwing that out there, it is a lovely fabric, but if I had to do it again, I would try to find something that's more of a lighter weight. You can see it's a fairly substantial fabric here, but also one that is all natural of some sort, so that, because there's a lot of pressing involved with this, in this whole jacket, so that that's not going to become an issue. So anyway, let me finish cutting this out and I'll show you how I mark it. So the main things that I'm going to be marking on here are, you know, my little notches. I'm just going to draw those in for right now. I have a circle up here that's going to help me understand where my easing is going to start. I have 2 quilting lines and they are curved. So what I've done is I made a little hole with my hole punch and scrap of leather, at the very top of each line, at the bottom of each line, and in the middle of each line, okay? And that's because when I'm drawing it, where's my ruler? Here you are. If I was to connect just those two, I would miss the curve, but putting a dot in the middle, I can go up there to that one, and then from that one to that one, and just kind of work it out as I'm quilting it, you know, to make it smoother. So the other thing is there's a little circle over here, and that is going to become very important when we're doing our little vent closure. That's how I'm doing it right now. Let me go ahead and pull this off. So again, you see how those quilting lines are? So then I can come in here and I'll just really quick and somewhat lightly draw these straight lines, all right? And then with those in there, I can artfully come back and make the curve nicer, okay? Because we don't want a really harsh geometric edge on a curve of a body, you know, curves on curves. Okay, so at this point I have 2 complete 3 sets of sleeves. So this is one sleeve here, all right? These are my 3 pieces. And I am just going to go ahead, carefully put them together and sew them at a 5/8 inch seam allowance. There are a couple curves, so if on this sleeve, when you're putting it together, if you feel uncertain that it's matching up exactly right because you are working with 2 different curves, please baste it. Please hand baste it first. I think that I'm not going to have any trouble. I'm just going to kind of, here's my 2 notches. Well, hang on, there's 1 notch. But I can just kind of fit it together and sew it that way. I'm going to be perfectly fine that way. So I'm just going to pin it and then stitch it. Stitching it using a thread that matches very, very closely. And I'm going to stitch all 3 together at one time. So that way I'll have a big trifold of sleeve when I'm done. Alright, so I have it sewn together, my 3 parts, and you can see I have it up on top of a sleeve roll here, and I need to press my seam allowances open so that they're going to lay as flat as possible, but I keep it up on my sleeve roll so all these curves that I've kind of built into it will be protected. And when I'm ironing, I'm trying to be careful not to iron over my quilting marks, because they will disappear, and if they do, I can redraw them. It's not a tragedy at all. Now, if your seams don't want to press open very easily, use steam, pat them down, and if you have a block, put a block on them, hold that on, and it's going to help a lot. Okay, so with these pressed open, pretty much, what it's time to do is interface this bottom, and the pattern's going to give you this piece that they want you to cut from interfacing, cut on a bias, okay? They want you to use a woven sew-in interfacing. I'm kind of doing what they are saying and kind of not. I'm using 2-inch wide 𝐥𝐢𝐤𝐞, which is a woven bias cut interfacing, but instead of having it just a flat piece that I cut out this way, I'm going to tailor this for my needs. So the piece is going to come up to 5/8 inch below this point, okay, so I just kind of drew a line there, and then over on this side it's coming up to the point where this dot is on your pattern piece right here above the buttonholes, okay? So that's where we're going to be interfacing. And what we need to do is stitch it on. And I'm going to be stitching it, they actually showed to put it all the way against the edge, okay? And I'm going to be stitching it at a 5/8 inch seam allowance. 2 reasons. 1, to hold it on. Well, I'm going to be basting it on, I should say. I will be basting it on. 1, to hold it on, and the other one is so that it's going to do double duty. That basting line is also going to show me on the other side where the edge is going to be. Okay, that'll come in handy later. Before I get started, I'm just going to mark that 5/8 inch mark on here so that it'll be all ready to go when I have it. So just drawing a line straight down my wiggin for a little ways so I know I have enough. Okay, so I cut myself a piece that is 24, 25 inches long. I think that that should be enough to cover what I need to. So I'm just going to get started pinning it along the edge. So the way that I'm going to be mitering this is I'm just bringing my wiggin straight down to my edge line, folding it up at this point, and then making another fold going off in this direction. And the thing is, it's not a perfect 45-degree angle. We've got some curves going on here. But that's going to give me a pretty nice miter that's going to meet up. So I'm going to run my fingernail down it, make sure it's nice and steady. I'm going to just leave it folded for right now. Continue on like this. And very carefully, now because my wiggin is cut on a bias, I can mold it to this curve. That's the whole point, is that all the curves that we worked into the jacket need to be able to stay that way. And again, at this edge, I'm going to do the same thing where I take it all the way to the edge, fold it straight back. So this is even with the edge here. And then fold it up so that this side is even with the edge. Okay. All right. And continue pinning. And at this point, I can see exactly where my end needs to be. Fold it right there and trim it. Okay, so now this piece is ending at the right spot. So what I'm actually going to do is, now that I know where my corners are going to be, and yes, I could probably do the same thing by laying it on top of here and it's flat, you know, but I kind of like molding it because sometimes things shift just a little bit. And I can take this over to my machine and just run a very tidy straight stitch straight down that fold, hold it really securely, and then I can cut this with pinking shears so that there's not a whole bunch of extra bulk right here. All right, so now I'm just going to trim that off so I have a nice pinked edge, no bulk on these sides, you know, and I'm fine. Do the same thing over here. Okay, so there's my little stitching just to hold it together. So now I'm going to actually put this on and attach it with some hand running stitches straight down my marked line, which is at a 5/8 inch seam allowance. And I am going to be using my white utilitarian basting thread because it's going to show up pretty well and I'll be able to pull it off easily when I'm done with it. Alright, so I have it basted, running stitched, whatever, on here along this 5/8 inch line. Alright, from the outside, if you look very, very closely, you can see traces of my thread, but it's not very overt, you know. If I forget to pull them out, no one else will ever notice them because they're going to be on the edge. So just for the camera, so you can see, I'm just going to mark some of them here so you can see what I'm talking about. So you can kind of see maybe this is where my threads are, okay? Now, if you remember when we were doing all of this, the same placement that I have here is what I want to have at the bottom of the cuff. And it's about 1/4 inch of the fabric exposed beyond the braid. And then I'm going to have my little fringes going on at the very edge of my cuff, okay? So this is what I want to replicate right here. So at this point, Claire Schaefer would probably be yelling at me. but I am going to be marking with my heat erasable pen on the right side of my fabric the edge where I want my trim to butt up to, okay? I'm going to mark that edge right there so that I have a very good idea of how I want to place it. And so what it is, it's about an inch in from the outside. So if I have a 5/8 inch seam allowance, I want a fat 1/4 inch, but my fabric is so fat I have to give myself a little bit extra to make that curve. So I'm just going to go ahead and mark that the rest of the way around. I am so sorry, Claire, but you know, sometimes you gotta be you. So now I need to start getting my trim ready to be sewed on. And so I'm placing it on this side that does not have the tab. That's the side where the L goes up. This is going to be underneath, so it does not have the trim going up right there. You would think it does. It feels like it should, but it's not. So this is actually going to be kind of tapering down this way, and this up here is going to be tapering off this way. All right, what I am going to be doing is basting this in place because I will be sewing it by my sewing machine. So at this point here, where this is the edge of my fabric. When it's folded, it'll be the edge here. This is the corner that's going to line up to it, I guess we could say. So from here, I'm going to be turning my fabric, my trim down so it kind of goes off the edge at this corner down here. And I'm just going to loosely pin that there so it's going to stay put. Okay. I'm going to be basting it. Just go ahead and get started here very loosely, straight up the middle of my trim, just to hold it in place while I get everything else put together on here. There is a corner, and it's, you know, coming along that corner, that edge line that I drew, and then there's a dot up here that we've marked from our pattern. Let me let go of the camera. Okay, so that's the dot from our pattern. Just above that dot is where my trim is again going to come off and towards the edge. And that way when we're sewing these, the edge of the trim will get locked into that seam work and it'll be nice and neat. So with all of this in place, I'm going to go ahead and baste it, and then I'm going to sew it in place on my sewing machine with a medium width zigzag stitch. So I have my trim basted on, and I think it's going to look really pretty. I have it basted, you know, all the way from my curved in down here to my curved in up here, so nothing is going to come off. Double checked, it's all lovely. So now I'm going to come back with a zigzag stitch straight up the middle in my coordinating thread to hold it all on nice and securely. So this is what it looks like, and I have a zigzag stitch going down, but it's actually pretty darn invisible because the pattern of the braid is diagonaled and the stitch are diagonaled. It really blends in together very well. So when I'm doing my final press on this, all of these marks are going to disappear, so I'm really not worried about that. And my edge coming off here is nice and secure. I'm just going to leave those the way they are for right now. And to do the other arm exactly like this. So I have my main fashion fabric sleeve put together. This is all stitched on, and now I need to work on my lining. So I'm not really going to work a whole lot on marking up my lining because the corresponding piece in the fashion fabric is already marked. What I am going to do is go ahead and sew the 3 pieces together so that I have 2 complete lining sets, one for each sleeve. So I'm going to sew them just with the same 5/8 allowance and press those seam allowances open, and then we will combine the 2. Alright, I think that we're about to have a crossroads at this thing on buttonholes. And if you remember way back when I made all of those hand embroidered, hand threaded buttonholes for the front, and they turned out beautiful. And you made them when the fabric was, a single layer. It was like one of the first things we did. And then after that, you lined it and trimmed it and all of that stuff because we wanted to make sure the buttonhole was really pretty in the back, and I still have to do some finishing on that later. I thought that these were going to be functioning buttonholes on the cuff. And the answer is yes and no, and I'll show you what I mean. First of all, they don't even tell you to start making your buttonholes, and they want the same threaded buttonholes until after you have the lining all attached and everything's quilted and everything, okay? So right off the bat, there is absolutely no way the back of your buttonholes are going to look pretty like the opening in the front of the jacket are, okay? Because in that one, there's like these welts that we're putting on the back to make it look nice on the back. And I was trying to figure out, why in the world aren't you doing that? And then I realized that they're going to want you to sew your vents closed. So yes, they want you to go through all the work of putting hand threaded buttonholes here, but they want you to sew the vent closed so you're never going to open them and close them anyway. And at this stage of the game, I don't want to do that. One, because I already have my trim on. The last time I did it before we put the trim on. And then according to their directions, they want you to sew all of these buttonholes on after you have the trim on, okay? That's very difficult working around that because the buttonhole placement is right here. Like if I lay this over, you see, it's right there. There's no leeway at all. So I'm going to skip making buttonholes on here. I don't see a point. I think it's going to be a hassle. These are the buttons that I'm going to be using. So I place these over the threaded buttonhole openings on my jacket. And you didn't see the threaded buttonholes at all because these are so big and wide. And my threaded buttonhole matched my fabric so well that it was kind of pointless. So I am just going to make my make my whole sleeve without making the buttonholes. And when the time comes to close it up, I'm just going to sew my buttonholes on. They will be non-functioning. But honestly, they don't want you to have a functioning cuff anyway. They want you to close it up. So I'm just going to save myself 4 hours of agony and everything else dealing with this. So if you are making this and you really want to have functioning buttonholes and you want them to be very nice, just like the opening, what I would do is totally forget the order that they're saying. I would not put your trim on until after you put your buttonholes on. And let me just show you here. Hang on. This is where the buttonholes are supposed to go, okay? So if I put my pattern piece on top of it, you can see that the interfacing, and this is the same width of their interfacing piece. It doesn't cover well, it does cover, but just barely the opening for the buttonhole. And that fusible interfacing worked so well making it that you would have to actually, if I was doing it again, I would fuse a piece of lightweight interfacing on the whole back of this piece, okay, just so that there's not a cutoff point. Very, very lightweight to hold all the threads together before I even put this on, okay? Then after I have this part put on, but before I have the trim put on, make my buttonholes exactly the same way that I showed in the first video that I did it on the jacket front, and get that out of the way before you do any of this, okay? Anyway, I just thought I would tell you that. I know it sounds kind of like I'm venting, but I'm just wanting to explain why I think their order is not right. You know, it's just not right. So anyway, skipping that, let's go to the next step. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do, this is my lining, which is the same size, and it's sewed together, okay? And I have all of my seam allowances pressed open. Oh, and I want these to still be pressed open. We'll make it work. What you need to do is line it up so that the seam allowances match, so that the center of one seam allowance is exactly on top of the coordinating seam allowance on the bottom. Open it this way and just line up the edges. That might be even better, okay? Just like this. And that way, for sure, everything's going to be matching. Until you get to the bottom, of course. Put your pins in the seam allowance up here, okay? So say this side is done now. I'm going to flip it closed, turn it around this way, open up this side, and I'm going to do the same thing, pinning this seam allowance to the coordinating one underneath it. Put one at the top and one at the bottom to start with. And then we'll just work on the rest of them, matching them up. All the way. Now, once you have this done, what you need to do is come in and they want you to attach it with running stitches, okay? So, say this is your seam here. They want you to use, with a needle and thread, running stitches in the seam allowance, but fairly close to your stitching line to hold it all together. Now, before you get started doing that stitching, you need to measure up 4 inches because they only want you to leave that much of a gap down here to leave it open, I guess, while you're doing all of the hemming and things. So 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm just going to put a little line up here with my heat erasable pen. It looks terrible, but it will disappear. And that way I can see it from the other side and I can know, okay, this right here, that dot, is the point where I'm going to start. So grabbing my thimble and needle number 4, I believe. And I'm not doing tiny, tiny stitches. You can see, hopefully, this is my machine seam right here. And these are my awkward but substantial running stitches. So what they're going to do is keep this in place, all right? So I'm just going to do that all the way up to the very top. You don't have to leave any gaps at the top on both sides. So now what I'm doing is these are sewn underneath all the way up here. You know, it's still loose down here at the bottom. So I am just smoothing it over, smoothing the lining over, trying to match up the edges of the lining with the edges of my main fabric and pin it so it's fairly secure around the outside edge because I'm going to need to start marking where all of these quilting lines are. And the way I'm going to do that is they want you to make diagonal basting stitches over the line. So like on this one, you can kind of see through my lining. Here's my quilting line, okay? They want you to make basting lines that basically zigzag over it. I am actually going to run a basting line right next to it instead. That way I'm not going to be stitching over my basting and it'll be very easy to pull out, but at the same time it's going to be very secure in making sure the placement is right because I'll probably only be basting about 1/4 inch away from that final stitching line. So hopefully you can see faintly the black is my quilting line and my big old basting stitches right next to it. That's how I'm going to be doing it. So there's one on this side and I believe there are 2 on this side. So it's going to be 3 quilting stitches altogether. Once I get them all done like this, I will be going over to my sewing machine and going ahead just like with the bodice of the jacket, machine stitching it from the top to the bottom, and then we'll work on the ends then. So at this point, I'm ready to pull out my basting stitches. which was very easy because I did not sew over them. And I can go do the same one up here, just like that. And I did do a back stitch at the beginning and end of each row, but I just went back. I didn't go back and then forward again. And I left my tails long because I am going to be pulling them in between the layers, just like we did on the bodice, and tying them in there just so that they stay nice and neat. So I have my little easy thread needle here where the thread just pops through the top. I don't really like to use those for everything else, but for something like this where it's literally just one stitch, it's great. So then I push the bobbin thread through and push the needle thread through, and hang on a second. Once I have them both on the inside here, I just make a nice big knot, but before I pull it tight, I stick something pointy through that loop, point it down where I want the knot to be, and pull on it, and it's gonna bring that knot down and be nice and neat, so I can just clip it off and I don't have to ever worry about those threads wanting to work their way out. Once I ironed this, all of these dark marks from my heat erasable pen underneath will disappear. So after I get all of my loose ends tucked in, I am going to do that. I am going to go over and press this. Okay, so this is what our sleeve looks like right now on the outside. And I have ironed it, so all of the little dark clouds underneath the lining have disappeared. This is what it looks like on the inside. Nice and neat and tidy. So right now what I need to do is fold this bottom up. I'm just going to stick a little weight on there to hold it out of the way. Oh, this didn't get ironed enough. That's okay. That's okay. Now remember back when I was figuring out where to put the trim, they had us come and baste all the way around here at 5/8 of an inch. We're going to need that right now. This part over here that's cut out and the bottom edge, not this one right now, just these two, I need to fold up at that 5/8 mark. So here you can still see because I didn't iron it well enough. Folding those up at the 5/8. Once it's folded up all the way, they want you to baste it. Now, right here where all of this is going on, there's a lot of bulk there. They don't actually tell you, but I'm going to cut some of this out because that's just a whole lot to have down right around the cuff of your jacket. Okay, so I'm going to do that to both sides. And we're also going to have to do that same mitering technique in this corner over here that we did in the jacket. So you can refer back to the jacket video. I will show it one time though, in case you're just skipping over here and you haven't seen the other videos. So I'm clipping that bulk out of there, you know, just leaving enough that it's going to keep those seams secure. So I can fold that up, and I'm going to use some pins just to hold everything in place at that 5/8 stitch line or basting line that I have until I get the whole thing folded up. Alright, so the first thing I actually need to do over here is deal with all of this. It's not just mitering the corner, it's dealing with this big trim piece here. And I can see that this is the extent that I need the trim to be. After that, it's going over the edge. So I am just going to stick a little pin right there to remind myself of that, okay? And I'm actually going to pull a couple of these clips off for right now. So I have a piece of Scotch tape around the edge that I just kept on there to keep it from unraveling. And I'm also going to clip a couple little stitches. I kind of ran off the edge with my zigzag stitch. So what I'm going to do is cut off my Scotch tape, unbraid this little like 1/2 inch or so beyond it, because when it's unbraided it seems to lay flatter. When it's braided and it's crossed over itself, it gets thicker. So I'm going to clip off my tape right here and open it up from this point at the pin below Did it so well. I even have this little fusible tricot down here, so I'm going to pull that little fusible tricot off. Okay, and now I'm just going to lay all of this flat and just kind of clip it in place right now so it doesn't want to go anywhere. What I need to do is come back with my needle and thread and thimble, of course, and I am going to stitch these pieces of trim onto, hang on, I don't want all of this folded behind there. I'm just going to stitch them onto this seam allowance nice and flat here so that it won't want to unravel and I can know that it's going to be laying nice and flat. And I'm probably going to be doing that about halfway up the seam allowance, so about 1/4 of an inch in from the side. Alright, so now that I have that secure, I am once again folding up this fold here, and you can see it's a fairly uniform amount, distance from the trim down to the edge there. And what I'm going to be doing is making that little triangle clip to miter it. So let me just draw some things here. If this right here, I need to find that spot where the two seam allowances meet, okay? So if this is a 5/8 and this is a 5/8, right there, right underneath that trim is that spot. So I'm going to cut out my little triangle clip actually up here, a little bit different from before, and that's because with all of this going on, I need to miter this a little bit differently. So just like before, from where I cut that triangle, I'm folding those two sides together and folding it up. So that's going to make it want to fold in a bit. Now I do have all of this trim here. I'm just going to have to, while I am working with pressing it and working with hand stitching my lining and everything, I will just be doing my best to make it as flat as possible, but it is what it is at this point. So because of the miter, that edge of the fabric is not, it's up at an angle here, okay? So it's not going to be visible down here. And I think that's doable. So let me go ahead and stick my clip, actually a couple clips, back down here and back over here. And what I'm going to actually do now before I press it is come back with my big basting thread, and no, I am going to do it with my matching thread because there's a good chance that this is going to stay in there and I'm not going to pull it out. So with matching thread, I am going to baste this into place. Okay, once it's basted and all the clips are then removed, then I'm going to go over to my ironing board and press it very well. Alright, so now that all of this is done, it is pressed. After I basted it down, I pressed it, got all of this as secure as possible and as flat as possible back there. Now it's time to sew the sleeve together. So I'm going to be basting it before I stitch it on the machine just to make sure things line up because it's really important that these dots are perfect. So what I'm going to do is put a pin through this dot, find the one over here, which is right here, okay? So I've got a pin through the dot on this side to the dot on that side just to make sure it's lined up really well. And match it up from the top, secure it there, and I'm going to come back and I'm going to hand baste this with my super duper basting thread at about a 1/2 inch, which will be just inside the seam allowance to where my stitching line is, because that way I can follow it with my machine then all the way to this point. So in order to know where that 1/2 inch line is that I'm going to be basting on, I need to know where the stitching line is. And since I did not hand thread the stitching lines, I drew it on just now. You just saw me finish that up. And so the line I drew is at 5/8. And that way when I come back here with my basting thread, I have something that I can guide with. Now, right here, there's a bunch of more trim there. And so I'm actually glad I'm basting so I can make sure that that is going to be nice and secure as I go ahead and stitch it. And it's not gonna push things out of shape, because sometimes, like, if there's a big bulge of something and you're stitching along all happy and life is good, and then you hit that, you know, it might cause an issue. So this way everybody's aware of it and I can plan ahead, but also the basting is going to keep it from wanting to push one way or another. I have it machine stitched all the way down that line that I marked, and I'm going to pull out my basting thread now. Well, I think I am. Give me 1 second here. Okay, so my machine basting is out. Now what I need to do is, this is the back, the one with the little part that sticks out, that's the back. And I need to clip diagonally from this corner down towards our dot. Okay? So this is clipped diagonally. Now what I need to do is, actually I'm going to open up this one little basting stitch here, because I need to turn this whole little edge under and tuck it in and baste it back down. Okay? I need to make sure that it's turned under from this point over, just like that. Now this is going to be underneath the other flap, so it's not as critical that everything is mitered, but if you feel like you need to for your particular garment, go ahead. I think that since I don't have extra trim and everything going on, I'll probably just cut one of, well, here, I'll show you what I'm going to do. So this is how I have it folded. Just gonna put a clip here to hold that. All right. What I'm gonna do is just come in here and cut this little edge out like that. All right. So that way when I fold it in, it's a little less bulky, but I don't have to worry about mitering anything. So that's how I'm gonna do it. And then I need to come back and with a running, basting, whatever kind of stitch, just to keep it all secured and held down, sew that up and over here. Okay, so now I'm over here at the ironing board and I need to start pressing this. So I'm going to be pressing it open nicely. And once I have it nice and hot and steamy, I'm going to put my block on top of it and hold it down for as long as I feel like it, until I get bored, and then I will lift it up and move it. This fabric does not want to lay completely flat. I'm going to try something. I need to press it open the entire way, but it's too narrow down here for my big fat seam roll. So I need to come up with some options here. Actually, I think what I'm going to do is use my spoon. There you are. I have a wooden spoon. If I place my wooden spoon so it's along the seam line, that's going to have it up just enough that it's going to press that ridge open, but I'm not going to be doing a hardcore press on everything underneath. So I need to be opening these up too down here. Okay, press that flat. I can rock it over my spoon because that's fun. Alright, so now down here at the very bottom, what I need to do is this flat side that doesn't have this, I'm going to need to fold in at that seam allowance, and when I get back to my table I'll be doing the mitering thing at this corner. But for right now I'm just going to press that. So trying something else. This is a little pressing mitt. It's just, you know, a little heat resistant pressing mitt. I'm just going to stick that in here, and I still have those basting stitches from when I put my wig in on, so I'm following that for my pressing line here. And press that down. And like I said, I will be doing the mitering thing on this corner once I get back to my table. I need to leave this flat, okay, because it's going to be the underlap over here. So I'm just going to stick that in there and press it down flat on top of my little mitt and press it on there. So one way or another we'll get it all done. Okay, so with all of this done, my next step is to go back to my table and stitch this down by hand and carefully miter this corner, which is the corner where my trim makes that 90-degree turn. So I'll be making sure that when I make it, the amount of fabric on the outside of that trim is pretty symmetrical and everything, so it'll look really nice. So here we are. This has been stitched down, this corner has been mitered and put into place, and I'm feeling good about that. Now what I need to do is start dealing with some of this lining. So the piece that does not have the flap, okay, the flatter piece, this is the front, you need to make sure that you have that dot on there, and of course mine is not there. So I'm just going to take my pattern piece, lay it on there, and mark this little dot up here, okay? Just to get an idea of sizing and everything, I'm going to unfold my lining just to see if it's coming up to that spot where everything is cut and all right there, just above where we just folded down the top of this, all right? And it is. So what I need to do is come in from the side and clip to that dot. So see how I'm opening it up and smoothing this, the bottom part, underneath that flap. The top part is above it here. And making sure I'm pressing this seam allowance open, I'm going to guide this edge of my lining up to the edge of my fabric. Stick a little pin, and I'm putting my pins facing out because I'm actually going to be working on this side. So I have my bottom pinned. I'm going to come up here and pin my top also, so that way if there's any shifting or anything I need to do down between here, I can make it all fit. All right, so that's what I need to finish doing, is just pinning the two pieces together so that the edge of the lining here is lining up with the edge of my fabric there. Okay, so now I have it pinned, and I'm looking at it on the wrong side of this seam allowance. So from the right side, if this sleeve was open, it looks like this. The lining is coming across this seam allowance. This is the seam that we did to connect the two sides of the sleeve, and this is the far seam allowance. It's smoothed all the way over and pinned to this side. Okay, so I'm going to go to the top here, and with a needle and thread, with a thread that matches my fabric, because this will be left in, I am hand stitching it with running stitches, probably about 1/8 of an inch away from my seam line. This is my seam line here, okay? And I'm just going to run those all the way down. When I get down to where that dot is, that's where I stop, and I will knot it off at that point. So now that this is stitched down with, running stitches coming in this seam allowance, I'm going to lift this flap out of the way and turn the raw edge of this lining piece under, and I'm going to be pinning it to the edge of the fabric underneath here, because it's time to start finishing this stuff off, which is very exciting. So again, just like on the jacket bodice, I am placing it so that the fabric extends about 1/8 of an inch or so beyond the lining, like this. Now we need to stitch this down, and this is the final felling stitches, slip stitches, whatever you want to call it for down here. But you go down so that there is 1 3/8 inches from the finished bottom edge. So I am just going to put my ruler there and make a little mark that will erase. And so I'm going to do my felling stitches from up here at the top all the way down to that mark. Okay, so this is stitched down to that point. The bottom is still open, that 1 3/8 inches. Okay, so I hope you can see that. So now what I need to do is kind of fold this back down, open this side of the lining, and just smooth it over the best that I can. All right, trying to make it not puckered or anything up here. Now the edge I'm going to fold under about 5/8, and I want to line it up with the seam line, which is going to be just past where all of my stitching is. So if you can see, this is my running stitches. My seam line is just on this side of it. Okay, so once I have this smoothed over, I'm going to fold it under, which should be about 5/8 of an inch, and put it right up at that seam line and pin it this way. What I need to do, I just realized I don't have on here, is I need to draw this dot right here. And I can kind of eyeball it, but I want it to be precise. So I'm going to get my little pattern piece and place that dot, okay, just right there. So I can clip this corner diagonally towards that dot. Okay, so I forgot to do that ahead of time. So now I can turn this all under, and it should go all the way up to that dot. So this dot should match up to where all of this stuff is going on. All right, I'm going to scooch it over there and pin that first. All right, so that I know this is in the right place, you know, it's right here above all of this stuff so that the lining will cover that. And it's right at the edge of my stitching. I'm going to pull this out. You don't need to see that. And I'm going to put one more pin just above it to keep that still. And then just like the last time, I'm going to go up to the top and do the very top. And then I'll just work everything together, averaging it out in between. Up here at the top, I've got this quilting here. I want my lining to be even with my top edge, and just to keep it from misbehaving, I'm going to go ahead and put a pin there, you know, because it just wants to go whatever. So I'm going to fold this in, line it up here with that stitching line, and pin that in place. So now that I have my very top and my very bottom, it's just a matter of working everything out in the middle, and it should be pretty straight. So once I get this pinned, I am going to, again with my needle and thread, and my thread is matching thread, I will be doing my tiny little felling stitches all the way up here to hold it in nice and securely. Okay, so before I go any further, I'm trying to figure out what in the world they are doing. And my confusion comes in when I looked ahead to where they're setting in the sleeves. They want you to sew the fashion fabric on. They want you to basically to set the fashion fabric onto your garment and then put the lining on after that and whip stitch around it so that the entire seam where you sew the sleeve on is encased in that lining. Okay, that's what I'm seeing here. But they have also told us, you know, beforehand, oops, throwing my pen around, you know, to like put these running stitches all the way to the top of here, which is obviously sewing it to the fabric. And they, as far as I can tell, they're not telling you anywhere to take any of these running stitches out. They're just there. And if I start sewing these felling stitches in such a way that they catch some of this fabric, that will be impossible also. And we have already sewn these all the way to the top. Okay, so this is what I'm seeing. There's two different theories. You can either sew it on the fabric first and then the lining, but in order to do that, your lining kind of has to be constructed very separately so that you can pull it down, because what they're showing you here is to tuck your lining all the way inside of your sleeve while you're sewing it on. But that's impossible with the instructions that they gave us, at least as far as I can see. I may be wrong. So, two options. One, take all the running stitches out, undo these back here, you know, that we did, and pull those down so that everything can tuck down. Or sew it on as a complete unit and then come up with an attractive way to bind off those seam allowances on the inside. I just don't see undoing all of these stitches up here and undoing these stitches here and getting things out of whack when we've worked so hard to match everything together. It does not make sense to me. Okay, so this is my plan right now. We're just ignoring their directions at this point. I clipped these running stitches that were holding this lining to the seam allowance that they instructed us to do, okay? I clipped those at this base down here, similar to where the quilting lines leave off, because there is absolutely no way we're going to peel the lining back beyond the quilting lines, okay? And so I've also gone up and from that point I've clipped it like every 1.5 inches or so the rest of the way up. All right, so what I'm going to do is basically peel out, get my knot out here, peel out those running stitches like every 1 inch or so at a time. Place my little plastic ruler here underneath. So right now my ruler can't go farther than this because I'm going to run into these running stitches here I have not pulled out. And with my upper part of this lining on here, I'm going to go ahead and pin that. If I can get it to go through. By placing my plastic ruler under here, I'm not going to go all the way through. Okay? So I can do that. I can put another pin here, pull it up a little bit, and those stitches should hopefully come up because I only have like 1 inch or so of them at a time. Move my ruler down, pin it a little more until I get down to this level here that is in line with the top of my quilting stitches. Okay. So here's what I'm going to do. From this point up here to this point, I'm going to make very, very sure with my ruler under here that my felling stitches I make are only going through the lining layer. From this point down, I'm going to go ahead and grab a few threads from the fashion fabric layer so that that can be held securely just like the quilting and everything else has been. Okay? That's my plan. And with that, I should be able to peel the lining back enough that at least the top of it I can work. If the bottom, I may have to do a little fudging around at that point, but we'll deal with that then. But I think I'll be able to at least enclose that sleeve cap with the lining similar to what their thought is. But yeah, it is what it is. Okay, so we're just going to go with that. And I'm going to start up here at the top and just make my little felling stitches, working my way down. Okay, I've gotten all the way down here. Still have a lot of thread left on my needle. So I'm going to go ahead and work this little flap the same way, tucking things down, just making sure, especially up here where this intersection is and there's a lot of room for things to get a little bit wonky, making sure that that's nice and neat. So on this part, I'm not letting the lining be below. I want my lining to come all the way up to that edge because it's going to be on the inside, and once I get everything done, I will probably be wanting to slip stitch this to the underside a little bit. For right now, I'm bringing my lining all the way up to the very edge of my fabric here. Okay, so I'm gonna tuck in. See how this one little thread here wants to come out. I'm gonna make sure that I cinch that one in particularly. Put a little pin there. And do the same thing down here. Stop 1 3/8 of an inch from the bottom once again, okay? So we can do all of the hem at the same time. I just realized something. This fold right here, I was intending to put the the selvage edge trim on. Hang on a second, I have stuff all over my camera. I was intending for this to be coming down this edge because this is the outside one here. So I may have to rethink that, you know, these things happen. But anyway, leaving that aside, make sure that you measure up 1 3/8 inch from the very bottom here and put a little mark, and that's where you're going to stop your stitches coming down. So just like the other ones, I'm going to flip it in like this, like that. Okay, now on this one, yes, I will be leaving that 1/8 of an inch because it's possible that this will be visible from the outside. Very highly improbable, but possible. Okay, so when I said, oh no, a minute ago, this is what I was talking about. This is the outside, this is that little lap, and I think it's looking really pretty. What I had wanted to do was inside this lap have this trim coming down like this and then around the bottom of the cuff like that. Okay, and thankfully at this stage it's not a hard fix, it's just undoing some felling stitches and inserting it. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now because the next step after this is to work on hemming the bottom, and so that's the perfect time to insert this. So I'm going to go ahead and flip it inside out one more time. I just wanted to show that to you. Okay, so this right here is the one that I need to undo. And if you're not doing that little fringy extra side trim, well, you don't need to worry about this. Okay, so this is how I want the trim to appear, where it is maybe the fabric part of it is peeking out about 1/8 of an inch, and after that it's just the little fringes, okay? So I want this to match on my sleeve. So that's what I'm going to try to do. So this is the public side that I want visible, and I'm going to fold it so that it's just kind of bent in. You can see this is the right side and I'm bending it down. And then I'm just going to kind of tuck that in here so it's not too bulky inside that sleeve. Turn it this way so I can see how much is peeking out and pin it into position here. Okay, there you go. So to make this turn, I'm going to clip it almost up to the top. Like I'm going to leave about 1/8 of an inch of fabric there, and I'm just turning it like that. And if you need to make more than one clip, that's fine. You do what you need to do. Once I have it all in position, I'm going to come back and stitch it on with running stitches with matching thread, because I'm going to be leaving those stitches in. So once I had just the fringe stitched on, running stitches, so it's at the right height, I brought it all the way over. This is the tab part that's underneath. It won't show. I just brought it up a little bit so that, this won't show anyway, but it gives me a nice finish over here, okay? So now I went ahead and finished pinning under the entire rest of my cuff. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and do the felling stitches just like this, but all the way around the rest of the cuff. Okay, so I've got it all stitched in. These are not my neatest stitches, but it's because I was making sure that I came all the way through and through this top layer and got that and cinched it down. So all 3 layers are being cinched together with this row of stitching, okay? So that is it. What I'm going to do now is go ahead and sew my buttons on here. And I am going to be placing them the same spacing as on the pattern. And so if I put my bottom one here, my top one is 1.5 inches above it. Okay, so down here, if I put my bottom one, and the shank for my bottom one is in about 1/4 inch, okay? And I am going to be placing them right up against the trim, because that's pretty much how it's going to be on the jacket also, okay? So if I put my first one here, all right, there's a little dot right there. I'm going to come up 1.5 inches and mark for the second one. So that's how I'm going to do it, and I am going to be sewing all the way through both layers of sleeve. I am pinning through that under layer and the top. So my buttons, when I'm done stitching my buttons on, they're going to act to hold my sleeve together. I can always come back and put an extra little row of stitching, like right in here or something, to tack it just to reinforce it if I feel like it needs it. But I'm just going to do the buttons first, so I think that that's going to be really pretty. I like that. I'm going to use, actually, I had my matching thread there, but I'm actually changing my mind. And because I want to make sure that this is going to hold, I'm going to use a very strong quilting thread for this, because it's just important to me that holds very tightly. Well, we got the sleeves done. Well, actually one sleeve. I still need to finish making the other one, but I don't have to have the camera rolling to do that. You've seen it already before. And so I think that we should be able to get this all wrapped up in one more video. I'm hoping that in the next one I will be able to insert the sleeves, do some finishing work, sew on all the buttons, and I actually have enough of these that I might put a couple on that skirt, and I think that that would tie it together really cute. So I am very excited about the next video, because that's going to be pulling it together, and then we'll see the reveal, hopefully. Bye bye.